Tittle Tattle episode 57 is underway, and I feel like we're reliving 2016, Bill, because this is an article in the Washington Post. Thank you for the idea from one of my local supporters who passed me this article from the Washington Post again. If Trump runs again, do not cover him the same way. A journalist manifesto. And the subtext there, I believed in traditional reporting, but Trump changed me, and it should change the rest of the media too. Just a heads up for everybody. The executive producer has entered the studio. I am no longer in control of his show. She is getting on the chair behind me right now. I'll blink twice if I feel like I'm being held hostage. Okay, so the reason I think I'm reliving 2016 is because what's funny, the funniest about this is that this journalist, Margaret Sullivan, is basically saying, hey, I tried to be objective in 2016. It was the wrong thing to do. And now we have to, and she just fell off the chair. Okay. And you all right? Okay. And so now that we know the guy's a sleazeball, we really need to not be objective. But if I remember correctly, this article from 2016 said that basically the same thing. This is from the New York Times. Trump is testing the norms of objectivity in journalism. And this author, Jim Rutenberg, essentially says what she said, which is, hey, he's just a snake oil salesman and he's undermining democracy. And so we just can't do journalism with a capital J anymore. We just have to do advocacy and go after him differently. And we know that people are going to get mad about it, and his supporters are going to say it's proof that we're the fake news, but we just have to, because he's just an existential threat. So this is not a new idea. This is what I tell people a lot when I go back to like when things started to really shift in at least the national news. I feel like it was around this time, and this was the way it was sold. So it's interesting that Margaret Sullivan thinks she's saying something new, because it's not new. I mean, 2016 they were saying, and I don't think that what she makes the case for in this article is even factually accurate, that like somehow everybody was riding the middle and trying to do things objectively. I mean, I didn't get that. Did you, Bill?
Not one bit. No. And here's the deal. If you go deeper into the article, Margaret Sullivan, which by the way, I had to do a double check because there's actually a very popular, well-known adult film actress named Margaret Sullivan. So I had to double check here and make sure, because when it comes to smut and journalism for the Washington Post, they blur the lines. Anyway, so with that being said, I had to do my research a little bit, but deeper down the article, she talks a lot about how Trump supporters threatened her and, they told her to cut off her breasts and this, that, and everything else. Okay. First off, nobody deserves to be talked to like that. I mean, they really don't.
I agree.
Okay. So that's number one. Don't be a scumbag. Like what you like, just don't be a douche. Okay.
Yeah, don't do what you wouldn't want someone to do to you. It's just like basic, and you give fuel to the fire, just so everybody's aware. Like you're not making your case in the same way they're not making their case when they say stupid stuff too about you as a Trump supporter, when they, stereotype you and they get things wrong about you. You're doing the same thing. You're becoming what you hate, and that's
or what you claim to hate.
What you claim to hate or whatever. Like you're just becoming your enemy. And yeah, I agree with you. Just as a caveat to that.
Absolutely. Now that's number one. But number two, there's levels to this. And we've said this before many times during this content. We've said this before. There's level to this. It's not like she's Andy No and she got beat up and got thrown feces, urine, and all this other stuff on her. Andy No suffered, real life physical abuse. That man is going to be, he's going to have so many psychological issues with the assaults that he suffered. Okay. So there are there's differences to this. Okay. There's levels, I can't remember who it is. I actually think it was Don Lemon of all people who said, you can't compare patting somebody on the butt to rape. Neither one of them are okay, but one is extreme and the other one's, it's not cool at all, but it's nowhere near on the same level as the other. So I'm not saying but I will also say she didn't put any receipts out there. When it comes to this specific article, I didn't see any tweets, any emails, any screenshots of her suffering that abuse, which usually is a little bit of an indicator that maybe it wasn't as bad as she's making it out to be. But Allison's 100% right. This is nothing new. Why do you think Trump fought a war against the media? Because they didn't cover him in a fair and balanced way. He had battles with Fox News. Now, I'm not saying Trump doesn't deserve the vitriol that he gets from the media because he went to war with them. And I'm one of those, okay, I can only take the high road so many times before I've got to look down on you and say, bitch, I'm dropping the bow. So, so I get that. But at the same time, this is nothing new. Trump's never been covered fair since day one. Since the day he announced he was running, he's never been covered fairly.
And his supporters as well, which is, let's be honest, there are levels of Trump supporters, right? But half the country basically voted for him. So you're stereotyping a lot of people in one basket when they talk about that, because she says that a lot. Trump supporters. Well, what does that even mean? Like somebody may have voted for Trump, but they're not necessarily like all in on him. There may be people who are diehards. I mean, it's lazy, I think, to just say that. Okay, hang on one second. Let me pass this next idea over to Bill and see what he thinks. So she writes here, like, this is one of the things I think is interesting. Is she writes, it's too long to. Okay.
The producer's not happy today.
He's not happy. Okay, here, I'll put this on. See this, Bill? It takes too long to stop believing that whenever he calmed down for a moment, he was becoming presidential. It almost is like she's writing about a guy she had an abusive relationship with, and she's like, I just kept thinking he was going to come home or he wasn't going to slap me or whatever, but I just could. Okay, I don't feel this is not the coverage I saw in 2016, that we just kept trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Like, I just didn't see that. But it also shows you that one of the things they didn't like about him is that he didn't act, quote, presidential. That was one of the things that rubbed them the wrong way. It wasn't a policy thing. They don't like it that he didn't talk like Obama, who was a liar and did all kinds of things that, behind the scenes towards journalists, let's be honest, right? Coming after journalists and attacking free speech and journalists' ability to practice by spying on them. I mean, there's tons of stories about that, but he acted presidential, so that's okay. We're going to give him a pass. I mean, that's something I think we need to talk about. So take it away, Bill, while I deal with the producer.
Deal with the producer. Let her have her say, because I know she's fixing to get us all fired anyway. We're going to be out of here like CNN Plus and G4 TV. Anyway, so what Allison says is right. I will like to go back to her reference to the abusive relationship. Yeah, when it comes to a lot of journalists, not just Margaret Sullivan, but when it comes to a lot of journalists, they did treat it as an abusive relationship, and the journalists were the victims. But they kept coming back. They were like, okay, but I just see something in him. What do you see in him, bitch? A rematch?
Before we get to the rest of this interview, don't forget you can support my work by checking out my sponsors. First, go to AllisonWinePromo.com, where you can get 50% off of my favorite wines and 50% off shipping. One of these wines comes from a very small farm where they handpick the grapes. Another comes from almost 9,000 feet. It's an extreme altitude Malbec. The other uses natural fermentation. These are all very unique wines. They come with a very robust flavor. You cannot get these at the grocery store. So go to AllisonWinePromo.com, support my work, and have a great Malbec from Argentina. Also, you can go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. That's twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. These are USDA certified high altitude Nicaraguan roasts. There's light roast, there's dark roast. There's also a limited black edition, which is very good. And if you're into tea, they actually have a tea. It's called Caturra tea. It's tea made from the fruit that's around the coffee bean. So check out AllisonWinePromo.com, twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. Support my sponsors, which keeps me in business. And let's get on with the interview. So this is one of the sentences. As Trump prepares to run again in 2024, it's worth reminding ourselves of the lessons we've learned and committing to the principle that, okay, remember, this is exactly what they said in 2016, committing to the principle that when covering politicians who are essentially running against democracy, old style journalism will no longer suffice. Okay, so it's just out there. Like anyone who says like, oh yeah, this is subversively, talking about doing journalism differently. Like they say they're doing journalism, but they're not, and they're hiding it and being secretive. It's not true. They're just telling you right now, like, just like they said in 2016, which is why I just, again, think this article is funny, because that's essentially what the guy said in 2016, was that the dude's undermining democracy and we cannot do, quote, old style journalism anymore.
Can I point out a little bit of hypocrisy in all this? So
Sure.
you had the lady from MSNBC, the blonde, I cannot remember her name to save my life. She interviewed the Senate candidate in Pennsylvania who had the stroke. I can't remember the names off the top of my head. And she was saying that, look, this guy had a stroke, and he had to have closed captioning to understand the questions that I was answering him. And she came at him not hard. She wasn't dropping bows, but she came at him pretty firm. And she works for MSNBC, and all of her liberal friends have thrown this chick under the bus for doing old school journalism. So how in the hell can you sit there and say old school doesn't work, but it works for this guy this way, it works for that candidate that way, but it doesn't work for this candidate this way, and it doesn't work for X, Y, and Z this way? It's ridiculous.
Okay, so this is the end. And I got to say, it's like, did she plagiarize this guy? So I'm going to go back to that New York Times article from 2016, and read you the end of what he says. Okay, but this is the end of her article. All of these suggestions go against the grain of traditional politics coverage. Undoubtedly, this approach will draw accusations of bias from the right. Undoubtedly, journalists and news leaders will be put on the defensive. They'll need to get over that. The stakes are enormously high. Doing things the same old way isn't remotely appropriate. By now, that's something we all should have learned. Okay, let me read you what this guy said in 2016. While there are several examples of conservative media criticism of Mr. Trump this year, the candidate and his supporters are reprising longstanding accusations of liberal bias. The media is trying to take Donald Trump out, Rush Limbaugh declared last week. A lot of core Trump supporters certainly view it that way. That will only serve to worsen their already dim view of the news media, which initially failed to recognize the power of their grievances and therefore failed to recognize the seriousness of Mr. Trump's candidate. This, however, is what being taken seriously looks like. As Ms. Ryan put it to me, Mr. Trump's candidacy is extraordinary and precedent-shattering, and to pretend otherwise is to be disingenuous with readers. It would also be an abdication of political journalism's most solemn duty to ferret out what the candidates will be like in the most powerful office in the world. It may not always seem fair to Mr. Trump or his supporters, but journalism shouldn't measure itself against any one campaign's definition of fairness. It is journalism's job to be true to the readers and viewers and true to the facts in a way that will stand up to history's judgment. To do anything less would be untenable. So basically, they both say it's just, desperate
Copy
times
and
call
paste.
for desperate measures, right?
Yeah,
And they're saying
copy
the
and
same
paste.
thing. It's gonna make Trump supporters mad. It's gonna make people on the right say you're fake news. But you know what? Suck it up, journalists. You just have to do it. It's an unprecedented time. They both say that. So anyway, that's all I got. I just figured I'd show people that's very similar. Messaging from 2016. It is what it is. Leave your comments below. Bill, any final thoughts before we go?
Nope. Thank you so much for supporting us. Make sure you go check out all of Allison's stuff, wine promo, coffee, all that good stuff. Support Allison and all of her good work.
And I should say, I was just thinking, Bill, this issue of like gearing up and the new way of doing journalism because of this existential threat, which I also believe was pushed during COVID, might be something good to release to the general public. So you guys who are supporters on ROKFIN, Patreon, and Locals will get it first. But I'm thinking about maybe putting some of this video anyway up on like YouTube and some of the other platforms, just because, as we're heading into the 2024 election, it's fair. I think it's not just fair. I think it's probably a good idea to just go back in time a little bit and see where we've come from and how we're kind of repeating the similar strategies of the past. So thanks again. If you're watching this later on one of the other platforms, if we do post it, you should know that Bill and I do an exclusive show once a week for supporters on the other platforms. So go to ROKFIN, sign up and be a subscriber, or go to Locals. One of the great ways to support me is at AllisonMorrow.locals.com. You can become part of the editorial board, and all is good. Thanks, Bill. We'll see you all next time.